Nō mai, haere mai, welcome. I'm Bruce Munro, and with me is International Relations Specialist Professor Robert Patman, and this is Global Insight. With 2024 almost over, we want to take stock of how the past 12 months have changed the world that we live in. Welcome, Robert.
Morning, Bruce.
What's happened this year in global geopolitics that has surprised you?
Well, if we look at it in the big picture sense, I think it's been a tumultuous and even barbaric year in many respects. And in many respects, when it comes to humanitarian law, that's been severely challenged by a number of events. I think there's been three surprises for me personally. First of all, Mr. Trump got re-elected. He ran an openly racist, sexist, and partisan campaign, but he won quite comfortably. He got the Electoral College, although it's not quite clear that he's won the popular vote. And then, of course, there was the event which flows from the upheaval in Gaza, with the toppling of the Assad dictatorship, which was a major geopolitical loss for the Putin regime. So those two events, I think were significant. And a third surprise for me, but it's linked to one of these events, was the fact that the United States, the world's most powerful country by quite a long way actually, has shown itself unable to act as a global power in the Middle East. It's very much aligned to one side, which is Israel. And in doing so, it's undermined key principles which the previous US presidents have upheld, humanitarian law, for example, and the rules-based system. So that's been a bit of a sobering outcome, I think.
Have there been any other big events in this year?
Yes, I think one that's just happened since November, which is quite shocking actually, given how carefully America guards its airspace, has been the intrusion of literally hundreds of drones stroke UAPs in sensitive sites in the United States, largely nuclear sites. America's been powerless to do anything about it. And questions have been raised in the American media, not so much in the mainstream media, but people like Russ Coulthart, who works for an Australian journalist who works in the US and in Australia for News Nation, been raising very tough questions. Also scientists such as Avi Loeb at Harvard and chap at Stanford. Gary Nolan and Harvey Loeb have raised questions about this. This problem of the inability to intercept and stop surveillance of sensitive military sites in the US is not confined to the US. It's been happening in China, it's been happening in Russia, Germany, the UK. The common denominator seems to be that these craft, some of which are of varying sizes, seem to evade all the usual detection facilities. They don't seem to be able to be shot down. And the Biden administration, when they were asked about it, because this is causing quite a concern now amongst American public opinion, not least in New Jersey, where people are confronted every night by large numbers of swarming drones, stroke UAPs. The administration has maintained that they are acting legally and not doing anything to cause national security concerns, which is beginning to cause some derision in even the mainstream media. You only have to think back to how the administration got so animated over a Chinese balloon. Well, now we've got large numbers of drones stroke UAPs which are penetrating the really top secret sensitive military sites. And so this is one to watch. It's an interesting development, and it's not confined to the United States, it's global. So it's an interesting development.
Indeed. How have the events of this past 12 months, how have they changed the world?
I think what we're seeing is the change of an international order in which the United States was the dominant player. The US has been in relative decline for much of the post 9/11 period. It's not just down to the US, it's because of the fact that China has emerged as a second superpower. And also, we have this process of deepening globalization, which means that, what does that mean? It means that there are now linkages between people and countries that didn't exist before. And in other words, the world's become much more interconnected, which if you think about it, is a good thing if you're small, but it may be a restriction on your autonomy if you're big and powerful. And that's what seems to be happening. So I think what we've also seen in 2024, which is quite alarming for many liberal democracies, is the erosion of international relations based on rules and principles. And that is a grave concern for our government, for example. So I think we are seeing a transitional international order. And I think we've seen this for some time, but I think 2024 has pushed its trajectory further forward. I would characterise the international order of 2024 and before, but particularly 2024, as one characterised by alarm and hope. And much of the forces of alarm are, if you like, intensified geopolitical rivalry. And I suppose the forces of hope are represented by the fact that many of the key problems confronting countries can only be solved by international cooperation. That's yet to eventuate, but problems like climate change, pandemics, transnational terrorism, transnational crime, they can only be solved through international cooperation. So the jury's out on how things are going to shape up in the future.
You briefly mentioned New Zealand there. How has New Zealand's place in the world changed during this year?
I think New Zealand's role in the world has not objectively changed, but we have been wrestling with a number of problems strategically that have diminished our reputation, the way we've dealt with them. For example, one problem, AUKUS. We were reluctant to take a stance on that issue. And I think with the election of Mr. Trump, that making a decision on that's now become more difficult for the national-led coalition government. There's also been another significant development with relation to AUKUS, not just the election of Trump, but also the fact that the opposition Labour Party have now come out against AUKUS and said, should the national government join it, they will withdraw the Labour Party from that, Labour government from that arrangement. Other issues which I think the government's been challenged by, Ukraine, I was heartened to see in the course of 2024, should have happened before, the government finally recognises there is a strategic linkage between our interests in the Indo-Pacific and the outcome of the war in Ukraine. And that is to say that two of the biggest backers of Russia's invasion of Ukraine are India and China. So our security problems in our part of the world, in the Indo-Pacific, could multiply, particularly from China, if Putin is successful. And I think the penny has dropped. I think the government recognises now it will probably have to do more. So that's been, a good development. But I've been disappointed by the fact that New Zealand's been slow to recognise its key strategic interests involved the defeat of Putin. So they're among the issues that have challenged New Zealand. Another one is climate change. And the government has backpedaled on some of the commitments with regard to the commitment to reduce to zero carbon by 2050. For example, it's reopened the exploration of oil and gas. It's also, I think, backpedaled on other climate change commitments. That's resulted us in being unceremoniously relegated to 41st place in the Climate International Index. That's countries which are taking measures to ameliorate climate change. So we've dropped 7 places to 41. So I think the government, if it thinks that it can backpedal for economic reasons on its commitments to climate change, that could have significant impacts, ironically, on our ability to export, because many countries in Europe, for example, and now in Asia, are taking their climate change obligations a bit more seriously than we are, and are not pleased by the fact that we seem to be dragging our feet. So that's something that we've got to keep an eye on.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you for watching. Meri kirihimeti. Catch us next year on Global Insight. Ka kite anō.